I wasn't expecting a red carpet. I wasn't expecting a hug, a toast, or a warm seat at the head table. But I didn't think they'd put me in the hallway. Literally. The hallway. The vineyard estate in Sonoma was breathtaking, rolling green hills kissed by the last golden light of autumn, ivy-covered stone walls, and white peacocks wandering near marble fountains like they belonged there. Isabel always did have a flair for theatrics. Her wedding was no exception. The main hall was strung with crystal chandeliers, fresh peonies in champagne flutes, and a live string quartet that played Vivaldi as guests arrived. My Uber had barely come to a full stop when a man in a slate-gray vest opened my door. "Rachel Blake?" he asked. "Right this way." I stepped out, smoothed my navy silk dress, one of the last few nice things I owned, and nodded politely. I hadn't come to make a statement. I came because I was the big sister, because it was the right thing to do, because my mother had called 2 weeks earlier and said, "It would mean a lot to Isabel if you came. She wants this day to feel like family." Family. As I followed the usher down the curved corridor lined with framed engagement photos of Isabel and her soon-to-be husband, I already felt like I didn't belong. I'd been here 10 minutes, and not one familiar face had said hello. But I told myself it was fine. I wasn't here for validation. Just a smile. Just a seat at the table. We stopped at the registration desk. A young woman with a headset smiled like she'd been trained at a luxury hotel. "Your name?" "Rachel Blake," I said softly. Her smile didn't falter. Not exactly, but something flickered behind her eyes. Like confusion. Or maybe discomfort. She scrolled through a long guest list on a tablet, then nodded, too quickly. "Yes, right here. You're in the east alcove." I tilted my head. "Where is that?" She pointed vaguely to a hallway that curved behind the main reception room. "It's right near the coat check. There's a small seating area, very cozy." Cozy! I glanced over her shoulder at the massive banquet hall, where Isabel's college friends and Dad's golf buddies clinked glasses under chandeliers the size of tree trunks. I looked back at the seating chart. My name wasn't even listed. "There must be a mistake," I said, keeping my voice even. The girl blinked. "No, I'm afraid not. This is what we were given." My hand tightened around my clutch. I turned slowly, scanning the room. And there they were. My mother, Margaret Blake, standing behind Isabel, fluffing the lace train of her wedding gown. My sister laughed, her head tilted back, her veil shimmering under the lights. They looked like a picture in a magazine. Mother and daughter, glowing in perfect harmony. I walked toward them, heels clicking against the marble. "Mom, can I talk to you for a second?" She glanced at me, sighed, and muttered, "Not now, Rachel. Can't you see we're busy?" "It'll only take a minute." She rolled her eyes and stepped aside, barely. I took a breath. They've seated me. Near the coat check. She didn't even blink. We had to prioritize close family. You know that. I am close family. She gave me a tight, polished smile. "Oh, don't make a big deal out of this." And then Isabel turned. Her smile was saccharine, her tone sweeter than frosting. I'm sure it was just a mix-up, Ratch. Weddings are chaos. But her eyes, they gleamed with satisfaction. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, but cleanly, like ice breaking underfoot. I looked at my mother again. Nothing. Not even a hint of shame. "Don't ruin your sister's big day," she said softly, like it was a warning. "You should be grateful you were invited." That word, grateful, like they were doing me a favor just by acknowledging my existence. I didn't respond. I just turned around, heels clicking louder now, and walked straight into the hallway. The hallway smelled faintly of lilies and citrus floor polish. Behind me, the doors to the reception hall closed with a soft thud, and it was like I'd been gently exiled. I sat down on a velvet bench near the coat rack, still holding the name card in my hand, Rachel Blake, East Alcove. Printed in gold script. Like that somehow made it less humiliating. I stared at my reflection in the polished glass window across from me. A grown woman in a beautiful dress, lipstick perfectly applied. And yet I felt 16 again, unwanted, overlooked, like a shadow clinging to the edge of every family photo. And just like that, the memory returned. 3 years ago, Thanksgiving, Isabel was off traveling with some man she'd met in Portugal. The house in Brookline was quiet for once. No perfume clouding the air, no high-pitched stories about beach resorts or influencer friends. Just me, Mom, and Dad, Margaret and Walter. That afternoon, while the turkey roasted in the oven and the kitchen filled with warm cinnamon and sage, Mom asked me to go upstairs and grab a box of old family photos. "We're making a memory album," she said, "for Isabel's engagement." I smiled, nodded. It was rare to be included in anything sentimental. I walked up the creaky stairs and stepped into my childhood room. Everything was still there. The single bed under the window, my old books stacked unevenly on the shelf, a dusty poster of a Van Gogh print above the desk. I opened the drawer where the photos were usually kept, and that's when I saw it. A leather-bound notebook. Thin, light brown. It sat inside the vanity drawer, tucked under a silk scarf. I don't know why I picked it up. I wasn't snooping. Something just called me. I opened the cover. The handwriting was unmistakably my mother's. Elegant, angular cursive in dark blue ink. I read the first line. Isabel didn't cry her first day of kindergarten. She turned, waved, and walked straight in, like a little bird ready to fly. I turned the page. Another entry. Isabel's favorite dinner is my baked salmon. She always eats it with her fingers when no one's looking. Another. Isabel used to be scared of thunder, but now she tells me she protects her dolls from it. Page after page after page. A private journal. A mother's record of moments, smiles, fears, growth. All about Isabel. All. Isabel. I flipped faster now, desperately searching for anything. Anything that said Rachel. Nothing. Not a single memory. Not a mention. Not even a birthday wish. It was like I'd never existed. I clutched the notebook so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart thudded in my ears. I wasn't angry. I was hollow. When Mom walked in moments later, I was still on the floor, the notebook open in my lap. She didn't look alarmed, just mildly surprised. "You wrote all this?" I asked, my voice so soft it sounded foreign to me. She glanced at the pages, then smiled lightly. I had to keep track of everything. Isabel was always so sensitive. She needed it. I blinked. "And me?" She paused, then said with unsettling calm, "You've always been independent, Rachel. You didn't need to be written about." I nodded, because there was nothing else to say. But something inside me crumbled that day. Not with noise or drama. It fell quietly, like a house sinking into its own foundation. Now, sitting here, in a hallway dressed up like an afterthought, I realized nothing had changed. I wasn't invited to be part of the family. I was permitted, tolerated, but never remembered. The music from inside swelled. Violins. Applause. Isabel must have made her grand entrance. I sat very still on the bench beside the coats, clutching my purse like it might keep me anchored. Some people are forgotten by accident. I was forgotten. On purpose. Rachel. The voice was light, amused, almost mocking. I turned. Isabel stood at the threshold of the reception hall, framed in soft golden light. Her wedding gown shimmered like champagne, the veil catching the air as she moved. Her eyes sparkled, not with warmth, but with curiosity, like someone observing a misbehaving guest from a safe distance. She walked toward me slowly, her heels clicking against the marble. "Are you upset?" she asked, cocking her head. I gave her a small smile. One I didn't feel. Why would I be? She shrugged. Because of the seating, I mean. I told the planner there might be a few hiccups. Weddings are chaotic. People get misplaced. Her voice was sticky sweet, but her eyes gleamed with something harder, something sharper. It's not about the seat, I said quietly. It's about what it means. Oh, Rachel. She let out a breathy laugh. You're always so sensitive, always taking everything so personally. I didn't respond. She sat down beside me, brushing invisible lint from her gown. Her perfume was overpowering vanilla and ambition. You could have called Mom, she said, if you were worried about where you'd be sitting. I turned toward her. Do you ever listen to yourself? She blinked. What's that supposed to mean? You always assume people are trying to take something from you, or ruin your moment. You don't even consider that maybe. They're just tired of being invisible. Isabel tilted her head, lips pursed. This again. I stared at her. You really don't see it, do you? See what? I took a slow breath. That it's always been you. The attention, the affection, the memory books, the photos, the calls, every holiday, every decision, every spotlight, always, always you. She smiled like she was flattered. I don't blame you for being loved, I added. I blame you for pretending like the rest of us never noticed. Her smile faltered. You sound jealous. No, I said calmly. I sound tired. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then she leaned in slightly. Her voice dropped just for me. You've always wanted to be the victim, Rachel. That's your thing. You wear pain like pearls. It makes people feel sorry for you. Her words hit like frost. I never wanted pity, I said slowly. I wanted respect. You wanted to be me, she whispered, eyes burning. And there it was. The core of it all. Not just rivalry. Not just resentment. A belief that only one of us could matter. I stood. Isabel stayed seated, smiling up at me like a queen entertaining a peasant's complaint. You don't get it, I said. It's not about wanting to be you. It's about not wanting to disappear every time you walk into the room. She blinked just once, but her hands tightened slightly in her lap. I took a step back. I hope this wedding gives you everything you want, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Oh, it already has. I nodded, then added, that's what scares me. She opened her mouth, but before a word left her lips, someone else stepped into the hallway. Rachel. The voice was deeper, hesitant. I turned, and there stood Julian Carter, the groom. He looked sharp in his tailored tux, but his tie was slightly loosened, and his eyes were searching. He glanced between me and Isabel, then settled on me. Can I talk to you for a second? Isabel straightened. Is something wrong? Julian didn't answer her. He just looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Doubt, cracks in the image, uncertainty where there should have been joy. I nodded, and just like that, everything began to shift. Julian waited until Isabel disappeared back into the banquet hall, heels echoing in tight succession, veil fluttering behind her like a warning flag. Then he turned to me again, his jaw tight, his hand still clutching a champagne flute that he hadn't touched. Sorry about that, he said. For what? I asked, though I already had a dozen guesses. He sighed, seeing you sitting out here. It didn't feel right. I gave a short, humorless laugh. That makes two of us. He looked down at his drink, then back at me. Can I ask you something personal? I hesitated, then nodded. Julian stepped a little closer, lowering his voice. Has Isabel ever said anything about me to you? Anything strange? Off? The question startled me. I blinked. Why? He rubbed a hand across his face. Because lately she's been different. Sweet in public, sure, but behind closed doors. Controlling, secretive, obsessed with appearances. It's like she's performing a version of herself, and I'm just another prop in the scene. I didn't speak at first. My mind went back to the last family dinner, when Isabel called Julian the most manageable man I've ever met, and everyone laughed. Except me, or the time she bragged about how money is safer in a quiet man's wallet. I should have said something then, but who would have believed me? Now, though. Julian was asking, and his eyes, dark, uncertain, held a kind of quiet desperation. You might want to brace yourself, I said, because I don't think you really know who Isabel is. His face tensed. I'm starting to realize that. Suddenly, a soft voice cut through the hallway. Feminine. Calm. Sharp as crystal. Then maybe I can help make things a little clearer. We both turned. Diane Carter stood at the other end of the corridor, holding her phone like it was a loaded weapon. She looked flawless in a navy gown that draped like water over her frame, platinum blonde hair, swept into a perfect chignon. But it was her presence that stilled the air, not beauty, not wealth, but something else. Authority. A woman who'd seen too much and smiled too little. Mother. Julian said, surprised. She walked toward us, heels silent on the tile. A friend of mine runs the studio where Isabel gets her styling done, she said. Last month, I changed a fitting time, and they accidentally sent her backup files to my email. Julian's brow furrowed. What files? She handed him the phone. For a moment, he just stared at it. Then, slowly, his thumb began to swipe. I couldn't see the messages, but I didn't need to. I could read them on his face. Confusion. Disbelief. Then something deeper. Betrayal. His hand began to tremble. She said, his voice cracked. She said she's training me, that I'm too predictable, that once she has your trust, she'll control the estate through me. Diane nodded. She also texted her stylist about a plan. 6 months post-wedding, she'd file for legal control over shared assets. Quote, as long as I stay sweet, the house will be mine before he even realizes it. Julian's mouth parted slightly. His shoulders slumped. Like the foundation of everything he believed had just been ripped from beneath him. I stepped closer, gently placed a hand near his elbow, but not quite touching. He looked at me, eyes reddening, voice low. How could she? And for the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost at this wedding. I felt like someone who had been watching the storm roll in long before anyone else saw the clouds. I'm sorry, I whispered. He shook his head. I'm not. I'm glad I know now. Diane's gaze met mine. Thank you, she said softly, for not turning away. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The weight of what was coming had already begun to shift, and this wedding was no longer going to end the way they had planned. The private conference room was tucked behind the wine-tasting lounge on the second floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the vineyard, now cloaked in the soft amber hues of dusk. But no one noticed the view. No one cared about the glasses of water arranged neatly on a tray or the faint hum of the AC. The room pulsed with silence, tense, breathless. Julian sat at the head of the long oak table, phone resting face down in front of him. Diane stood behind him, one hand lightly on his shoulder, not possessive, not controlling, just steady, like a mother anchoring her son through a storm she saw coming long before he did. I sat to the right, back straight, heart pounding. I wasn't sure why I was there, maybe as a witness, maybe as a voice no one could silence this time. The door opened. Isabel walked in, radiant and sharp as ever, trailing silk and suspicion. Behind her came my mother, Margaret, clutching a designer clutch and wearing that strained smile she reserved for situations she couldn't control. "What is this?" Isabel demanded. Her voice was pitched higher than usual, not angry yet but cautious. "Why are you pulling people out of the wedding? Julian, your friends are asking questions." Julian didn't answer immediately. He stood, slowly, and reached into his jacket pocket. He placed a white envelope on the table. "You know what this is?" he asked. Isabel stared at it like it might bite her. She said nothing. It's a petition to annul the marriage, he continued, voice flat and cold. I've already signed it. The room shifted, like air being sucked from a sealed jar. My mother gasped, hand flying to her mouth. What? Isabel stepped back, her veil rustling. You're joking, right? Diane spoke then. Her voice was calm, but sharp enough to draw blood. We read the messages, Isabel. Every word. The ones you sent your stylist, your friend Natalie. The ones where you talked about Julian as a pawn. The ones where you mapped out how to take over our estate. Isabel's mouth opened, but Julian cut in. His voice was no longer calm. It cracked in the middle, then hardened. You called my mother a rich relic who only knows how to write checks. You said, and I quote, he's simple enough to shape into anything I want. Give it 6 months, and he'll be begging me not to leave. Isabel's face flushed. That was a joke. Between friends. You're all taking this out of context. Then explain the divorce consultation you filed last month, Diane snapped. Was that also a joke? That hit like a bullet. Even my mother looked shaken now. Is that true? Walter, my father, had entered the room at some point, but none of us had noticed. Now he stood in the corner, his face heavy with disbelief. Isabel looked between us, lips parting, but no sound came out. Margaret, he said, turning to my mother, did you know? My mother shook her head. I didn't think. I never imagined Isabel could. No, he cut her off, his voice low. You never looked. You never wanted to see what she was capable of. And then he turned to me, for the first time in years. Rachel, he said, and the word felt like a bandage being peeled away. I'm sorry. My mother looked stunned. I should have said something years ago, Walter went on, but I let things slide. I thought you were strong, that you'd be fine. I wasn't, I said softly, but I am now. Isabel finally snapped out of it. You're siding with her, she spat, eyes wide. Your other daughter, the one who's always resented me? This is what you're doing on my wedding day. Julian stepped forward, voice steady. This was never about Rachel. This was about you, and the lies you tried to build a marriage on. I love you, Isabel cried, desperate now. I just didn't want to lose everything. I was trying to build a life. Diane's eyebrow lifted. That's what love looks like to you. A 5-step strategy to own someone. My mother's voice, usually so polished, trembled now. Isabel, I don't know what to say. And for the first time in my life I saw it. Not guilt, not regret, but fear in Isabel's eyes. Not because she was caught, but because this time no one was standing by her. Isabel didn't storm out of the room. She exploded from it. The doors to the conference room slammed behind her, veil flaring like a broken flag. Her heels struck the tile with manic rhythm as she marched down the hallway, silk gown rustling like fire. Her perfectly styled hair had come loose around her face, and the diamonds on her ears shook with each furious step. The rest of us followed, but slower. No one rushed after her. No one tried to stop her. By the time we stepped into the main reception hall, the music had paused. The quartet had lowered their instruments. Hundreds of guests turned to look. Glasses frozen midair, conversations cut in half. And there, in the middle of the floor, stood Isabel, panting, flushed, eyes wild. You all think this is funny, she screamed, spinning around as though the chandeliers themselves were mocking her. You think this is okay? To humiliate me on my wedding day. No one answered. The room was a sea of stunned silence. Julian stepped forward, his face unreadable, his shoulders squared. No one humiliated you, Isabel, he said. You did that to yourself. She laughed loud and cracked. You love me. Julian, you said you loved me. I did, he replied, until I realized you never loved me. You loved the idea of what you could take from me. A few guests shifted in their chairs. One woman, near the bar, muttered something to her husband. The ripple of realization began to spread. "You're ruining everything," Isabel cried, her voice splintering. "Months of planning. Every detail. For this? Over a few messages that meant nothing." Diane walked beside her son now, elegant and composed. "They meant everything. They showed us who you are when you think no one's watching." Isabel's hands clenched at her sides. She turned too fast, and her veil caught on a centerpiece, ripping slightly. Her eyes landed on me. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You've always hated me, always been jealous. You came here hoping something would go wrong." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I simply looked at her and said, "I came to be your sister, but you never saw me as one." She froze. "You spent your whole life center stage," I continued, "but you never noticed who had to dim their light just so you could shine." Gasps echoed across the hall. Isabel spun back to Julian, desperate now. "You can't do this. We made vows. You promised me a life." He reached into his jacket and pulled out the same white envelope from before. He held it up for the room to see. "This is the annulment contract," he said clearly, "and I signed it." The room collectively inhaled. Even the chandelier lights seemed to dim for a heartbeat. Diane touched her son's arm. "Let's go." As they turned to leave, Isabel stepped forward like she might follow, but no one reached for her. Not her friends, not her bridesmaids, not our parents. She stood alone, surrounded by lace and candles, all of it now useless. A queen with no court, a stage with no audience. Her hands trembled. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. And then, without another word, she turned and ran. Her gown tangled in her heels, but she didn't stop. She shoved through the doors and vanished into the night. Behind her, the guests slowly returned to their seats. Conversations restarted, but differently, whispers instead of laughter, glances filled with unease. I remained standing for a moment longer, not triumphant. But still, I didn't need applause. I didn't need to be center stage. All I'd ever wanted was to be seen. And now at last I was. A week after the wedding, I woke up in my quiet apartment in Boston. No flowers, no music, no clinking glasses, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the filtered sunlight spilling across my kitchen table. I brewed a small pot of coffee, French roast, dark and bitter, the way I liked it, and sat by the window in my worn linen robe. There was a kind of stillness in the air. The kind that doesn't demand anything of you. My phone buzzed on the counter. "Mom, 9th call in 3 days." I let it ring. I already knew what she wanted to say. I'd seen it in her face that night, in the way she didn't chase after Isabel, in the way she looked at me like she'd never really looked before. But it didn't matter anymore. She didn't need to say sorry, and I didn't need to hear it. Later that afternoon, a text came through. "Rachel, I know I failed you. I know I was blind. I want to see you. Just the two of us. Please." I stared at the message for a long time. The old version of me, the girl who used to try so hard to keep the peace, who always picked the quiet seat, who dressed modestly so her sister could shine brighter, she would have said yes immediately. She would have picked out a blouse that her mother liked, rehearsed polite conversation, smiled through the awkwardness, and pretended she wasn't still bleeding underneath. But that girl didn't exist anymore. I set the phone down. No anger, no response, just silence. That evening, I went for a walk along the Charles River. The lamps along the waterfront flickered gently, their reflections stretching across the dark water like long, glowing ribbons. Children chased each other under maple trees, their laughter cutting through the cool autumn air. I found an empty bench and sat, letting the breeze tangle my hair. From my wallet, I pulled out an old photograph. Christmas. I was 16. Isabel stood at the center of the frame in a bright red dress, grinning. My mother's arm rested proudly on her shoulder. And me? I was half hidden behind the tree, smile polite, eyes already fading from the frame. I stared at the photo for a long time, then folded it neatly and tucked it back into my bag. I didn't need to tear it up. I didn't need to burn it. I just didn't need it anymore. When I got home, I pulled the old family photo album from the shelf. The one with the cracked spine and gold lettering that used to sit on our living room coffee table. I placed it gently into a storage box, closed the lid, and slid it to the back of my closet. Some endings don't need fireworks, just a door. Quietly closed. The next morning, I booked a trip to Maine. Just me, a cabin by the water, a stack of books. Maybe I'd finally start writing that memoir I used to joke about. Maybe I wouldn't. Maybe I'd just sit in the sun and let myself breathe. For the first time in my life, I wasn't planning around anyone else's schedule. No weddings, no reuniones, no guilt, just freedom. And as I clicked confirm on the ticket, something inside me settled. I didn't need their forgiveness. I didn't need their love. I didn't even need their recognition. Because I had found something stronger. I had found myself. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the peace you give yourself when you finally stop begging to be seen.